And welcome back to another video here on Wristwatch Revival. This time around, boy, do we have a project on our hands here. Check out this watch. This is a Tradition dive watch. I think they called it a skin diver from the 70s. I picked this up off of eBay for about 450 bucks, and as you can see, it is in horrendous condition. It's also not working properly. The movement is running, but the hands, the hour and minute hands aren't actually turning. Only the seconds hand will go. So we're gonna have to investigate that. These are very cool watches though. These were produced in the 70s. The brand Tradition is actually for Sears and Roebuck, which was, the biggest retailer in the United States for a very long time, going back quite a few years now. And they actually had their own line of wristwatches called Tradition, and some of them are sweet. They were made by Swiss companies. So there you go. Now, as you can see, this one is beat up, and it is going to be quite a project to make sure that it's running well and everything's going well. We've got some work to do. No doubt about it. First things first, though, let's throw it on the time grapher and just see how it's doing performance-wise. Again, the movement is running, but the hands aren't moving. The hour and minute hand. So we'll. Oh, this is not good. So everything's about as bad as can be here. As you can see, the amplitude is way low at 120 something degrees. The beat error's off significantly, and the rate is horrendous. Plus, we're getting the snowball, the snow effect here on the time grapher. So really a complete mess. And what I'm going to do is simply just service this movement, and then we'll see after that what's going on with the watch, because I don't know why it's not working. It's just one of those things that we'll have to figure it out. First, though, let's get the bracelet off. It's got what looks to be an aftermarket bracelet on it, but it's an okay bracelet. I don't know. It looks all right on it. And as you can see, for right out of the gate, we have a problem. The pin has broken. The thing is just completely fallen apart. You can see the spring bar is done. Now, this isn't a big deal. I have a bunch of these, and they're quite cheap, but it does show kind of where this watch is at. These actually don't break very often at all. And this one has been worn hard. Also, you can kind of see on the back, this was common back in the day. Somebody engraved their name on the back. This belonged to somebody named Lou. The date, by the way, is 1273 on that case back. And taking a look at the bracelet, it is beat up as well. Tons of scratches. You can barely even see what it's supposed to look like anymore, but otherwise it's in decent shape. And the watch itself, as I said, is in really tough shape. Tons of dirt. There's Lou. That was engraved by hand with an engraver. So let's try to take the back off of this thing and see what we're actually working with. Because this is going to be the first big step, is how's the movement look? How does it look inside? Why is it running so poorly? And unfortunately, the back won't come off at all. So we got to get the big guns out here, the case back remover. And I'm going to use these blocks that fit in to the lugs, and those secure the watch. I'm going to put a piece of plastic down here too, just to be safe. I don't want to damage the case any more than it is. But as you can see, these blocks just go in between the lugs, and then they hold the case securely. Real simple. And that means I can lower the opening part, and boy, this case back is really tight on here for some reason. It is a dive watch, so they're kind of meant to be put on pretty tight, but goodness sakes. Super difficult to get that thing to come off. I'm glad I have this machine to do it. So now we can finally get a look-see at what's going on in this thing. So let's see what's inside. What has Lou left us? Oh. Okay, well, a few things jump out. First, this is really cool. It's signed Sears and Roebuck Company, but also Swiss made. And you can see there's this stuff everywhere, dirt. And then that right there was once a gasket It seems to have completely deteriorated, though. It is a melted, crusted mess, and it's leaving little bits of stuff all over the movement, and it's probably also why we couldn't take the case back off. Now, this is an automatic watch as well. You don't have to wind this one up every day. And the winding, of course, is accomplished through the automatic works, which I'm going to take off first just to get them out of the way. And there we go. So we'll set that aside. And now we can work on getting the movement out of the actual watch and kind of see what we're working with here. But boy, is this thing in rough shape, as you can see. I am glad that it's kind of happily ticking away here. But as we saw in the time grapher, it is not a healthy watch. And I think it's just been neglected. I mean, look at the crystal. It's ridiculous. The dial looks pretty good. There's a few kind of stains on it, but nothing too terrible. So let's get the hands off of this thing first. Hands look pretty rough too, though. And now we can take the dial off. The dial's held on by these screws on the side that kind of pinch into the dial feet, the two little posts on the bottom of a dial. You can see the post sticking up there, and there's the dial. Well, it looks okay too, I guess. All told, not bad. Now, often I'll just take the hour wheel off, but it looks like it's underneath this other wheel, which actually is the calendar driving wheel. So we'll have to wait to take off those middle parts, and there's a plate that sits on top of the calendar works, and we'll need to take that off first. Okay, so away comes that, and everything looks clean under here. We can remove the calendar ring. It can be delicate. One thing I like about this calendar ring, by the way, is that they matched it to the color of the dial, which I think is a nice touch. And this little spring pushes on the jumper or not the jumper, but the calendar switchover mechanism, which is that thing right there. But it's stuck underneath the calendar driving wheel, so we'll need to take that off. And away it comes. And now we can take off the calendar advance mechanism and the hour wheel. That is the jumper for the calendar. That's what keeps it tension on it, just a little bit. So with that done, we can flip this thing back over, and let's take the balance off just to put it aside for safekeeping. It's still happily ticking away, so it's got that going for it at least. Which also probably means that the automatic works is working okay, given that the reason it started up again was because I was handling the watch. I didn't actually wind it up. It probably only has a little bit of a wind in it. And there's the balance coming out. Looks fine. This is my first time working on this movement. But it is similar to most Swiss movements of the era, so I can work my way around it pretty well. This is a crown wheel here. Again, that has a left-hand threaded screw. So to tighten it, you turn it right. It's weird. Feels very weird to do that, but it is how it works. And there's a crown wheel. We can get rid of that. And usually, yeah, there it is. There's a little kind of a shim thing on the post, and there is in this case as well. Now I can take off the click and the click spring. This thing has an absolutely minuscule little click. There it is, kind of jumping away on me. And there's a click spring. Click spring is usually tiny. I'm just going to kind of try to shield it to make sure it doesn't fly away on me. I've had that happen before, and these ones are so small. I mean, they can get caught on your clothes or even in your hair and you wouldn't even feel it. Now I can take off the barrel bridge. Now this particular bridge really does only cover the barrel there, as you can see. So we'll just pry that up. All right. Things are looking okay here inside the watch. That's the good news. It looks like it's been neglected pretty heavily, but not abused, and perhaps not subjected to a watchmaker who did more damage than good. Now we can take apart the train wheel bridge. This is held on by these 3 screws. Whoop. The bridge looks pretty clean. And now you can see the train of wheels there. And that's them sitting right there. Take out the center wheel here. And there's the third wheel that I just dropped on the ground. It's kind of a weird looking third wheel. I'll have to investigate that later. There's the fourth wheel and the escape wheel. And you can see there's still little bits of gunk floating around in here. That could very well be part of the reason why the amplitude's so low. I believe that the pieces that you see there are from that gasket that has completely disintegrated. And of course, little bits of rubber that have kind of melted down floating around in the movement could cause all types of issues. All right, now I can take out the pallets. And away they go. Now I can take out a little bit of the keyless works here, and this thing's just about stripped down. Not bad. Another plate, and this will expose the cannon pinion and this little, I don't know what that wheel's doing just yet, but that wheel. And I can just take the cannon pinion off. Now, I notice here that the cannon pinion comes off very easily, which is a bit distressing, but also, in my mind, likely the reason why the hands aren't turning, but the movement's running. Because the cannon pinion is what sort of connects one side of the watch, which has all the running stuff, all the running gears and the escapement and everything, over to the other side of the watch, which is responsible for displaying things like the hands and the date. And those are what they call friction fit, which just means like pressed on. And if there isn't enough friction, then the watch will happily be running and keeping time, but it won't be able to show this on the hands because there's nothing gripping on. So that's my first thought on maybe what's going on with why the watch won't tell time. Now I can take out the yoke and the yoke spring. And if I just flip the watch over, I can take out the setting lever screw, and the setting lever just falls to the bench like you would expect. Okay, now to prepare for cleaning, I'm going to put the balance back on the movement just as it sits with nothing else even attached to it. And that way I can put this whole thing into the watch cleaning machine, but don't have to worry that the balance spring will get caught on something or get damaged. It's just a precaution. And I like to just give it a little tappy tap tap here just to see that it's spinning freely before I finally lock it down all the way. And that leaves one more part, and this one's confusing for me because now I need to take apart the automatic works, but I've never worked on one like this before, and I don't really know how it goes together. So I take out this little clip, but then kind of nothing happens, and I'm poking around at it, and I can see there's a gear here. There's another wheel sticking off to the side. It's sort of halfway apart. Can I just, I can just grab that and take it out. That looks like some type of a gear with a little tension on it or something, but this should be coming in half and it's not, and I don't really understand what's going on until, oh, there we go. I flip it over and I can take the oscillating rotor off. And now I see that there's kind of two plates, and in between them goes the little wheels that you see there. There's also two springs that are holding tension on them as well. So I got that sorted. It's apart. It can go in the watch cleaning machine. The last thing to do, you guessed it. Let's get that mainspring out of the barrel. Ugh. This watch has definitely not been serviced in an extremely long period of time. I guess it's possible that it's never been serviced. Generally speaking, I assume that they have at some point, because it was more routine to do so when these watches came out, but it is absolutely possible that this watch hasn't. And it is interesting because there's quite a bit of dirt in the spring, but the spring itself is actually in pretty darn good shape. As you can see, there's a bunch of gunk in there, but check it out. This is the watch completely disassembled. And you know what? Not too bad. Of course, there's a lot of little parts, and that can be a little bit intimidating, but I feel like I'm getting a grasp for this stuff, and I'm ready to throw these parts in the watch cleaning machine and get to business. Now, one thing I do want to do, though, is clean up this case, because this case is disgusting. And so I'm going to give it a nice bath in the ultrasonic. So I'm going to take off the bezel first. And as you can see, the bezel's held in with this spring that kind of goes around the edge of it. And that just provides a little bit of tension so that the bezel more or less stays put. This is not a fancy bezel. You can see there's a hair stuck under there. This is not pretty. Inside of that is just pure dirt. I mean, look at that. It's gross. Now, I also need to start looking at this. Before I wash it, I gotta look at this gasket, and it is, well, this is the worst gasket I've had to deal with thus far. It is completely hardened and also seems to have completely melted in place. So I'm going to just take out the crystal so that I'm going to replace it anyway. And here we go. Let's get this gasket out of here. And the truth is, with this hardened mess, there's just nothing else to do but to just scrape it out with tweezers and pegwood and whatever it is that I can use to just forcibly scrape out this completely destroyed gasket. And it is bad. I mean, this takes me quite a while. And as you can see, it's made a complete mess of my bench. Just a disaster. And as I'm doing this, I'm not going to lie to you, I started to get some ideas. Now, I know a lot of you on here have asked why I don't do case or hand or dial restorations. And usually that's because my opinion is that I actually like the patina on an old watch. By the way, look at that dirt. I'm going to throw these things in the ultrasonic. But also, I get it. Sometimes restoring something back to its former glory is really cool. And I know that you want to see that. And frankly, I do want to have the skill to do that. So I've decided this is going to be the first watch that I do that on. And you're going to get to come along with me for the journey. So we are going to fully restore this watch to the best of our ability. And we're going to assess what we need to do and figure out how to do it. I don't know how to polish. I don't know how to do this stuff. But this is the watch that we are going to figure it out on. So first things first, ultrasonic, by the way, look at all the dirt. And also the spring came out, but look at all the dirt that came out of it. Ugh. Now, the first thing we need to do is assess. So if we're going to refinish this bracelet, we need to know what it looked like originally, and I've got a trick. if you peel up the clasp, you can see a couple of the links are relatively untouched, and you can see that it has a horizontal graining. Now you can barely see it on the rest of the links, but once you see that it's there, you can tell. Now on the clasp itself, you have to look really carefully, but you can see the horizontal graining there too. Now on the case, it's got graining that looks circular around the edges here, and then on the sides of the case, they are heavily damaged, as you can see. So we really have our work cut out for us. And there's some horizontal graining on here too that we'll want to replicate at some point. So at this point, I started watching a lot of YouTube videos and making some orders off of Amazon. As you can see, the back is in fairly decent shape, but needs a polish as well. So I bought these polishing sticks, and I've got my Dremel tool with a little thing, and I'm all set to go. And these polishing sticks are really cool. They come in a pack of 8, and they go from 400 grit to 7,000 grit. So I'm going to start off by doing one link. And if I polish it with the sandpaper sticks and then give it a polish on the Dremel tool here with some polishing compound, I want to see what I can get it to. And this is what I got it to. Pretty good. You can see there's still a nick on it, but for the most part, you can see how much better that is than the other links. And the idea here is you get them polished back down to smooth, and then you apply the graining to them after. But I need a way to get all of these links done. So I'm going to use this polishing stand, this block that I got, as well as the sandpaper that I have here, and go link by link by link. Now, this is tedious work, make no mistake about it. And I just need to sit here and get through and basically get enough material off the top of this stainless steel bracelet so that I can put the graining back on. Also, of course, I have to deal with the clasp here, which is curved. So that's going to take a little bit of a different approach, I think. So I'm going to start off with just hand sanding it forever. Trying out a bunch of different ways. Again, I'm figuring this out as I go. I don't really know what I can expect, but I watched a lot of YouTube videos. I watched one from my buddy over at My Retro Watches, Mike. He has a great video about polishing, basic polishing, and he even was kind enough to do it where he showed it on a Dremel rather than a full polishing wheel, because I don't have one of those, and he figured that most hobbyists like me would have a Dremel, and I did. So I thought that was really cool. So thanks for that, Mike. Very helpful. And now I'm going to start taking the different sandpapers to it. I'm just really giving this thing the business, just trying to get it whittled down as much as I possibly can. Okay, so first thing though, we need to put it back in the ultrasonic to get any polishing compound or debris off of it. And then we can inspect it and see what we actually came away with on our first run at this thing. So this is what we came up with. And, well, it's much improved, but it certainly isn't perfect. I'm going to give it a shot and see what we can do as far as the graining. Because again, I don't really know like how we need to get this before it's completely ready to go. This is obviously a lot better of a starting point. So let's get the graining on it and see how it looks. There's my polishing block, and here's some Scotch-Brite. And this is apparently how you do this. You take the piece and you just evenly apply pressure and drag it along the Scotch-Brite like that. And you just keep doing this for each of the links. And as you can see, a huge improvement, but I'm not going to lie to you. See all those little nicks and stuff? It just bothered me. If I'm going to do this, I want to do it right. So what I did is I went back and redid the whole thing again. I'm not kidding. And this is what I came up with. Now that's what I'm talking about. I am really happy with the way that this came out. And I'll be honest with you, I was kind of shocked because this is the first time I've done this and I don't really know what I'm doing. I followed the instructions the best I could, but I mean, I have different tools and stuff. And this is now the case, of course, I need to address that. So I'm going to do the same treatment that I did on the bracelet. I'm going to hand sand it. And in fact, I decided just not to use the polishing wheel at all for the case. I decided just to do it all by hand because I felt like that would give me the best feel for what types of sandpaper work, what they do, if they overdo it, if they're not enough. And then I can use the polishing wheel down the line as I get better at this. But I really wanted to see what it was like to just do this by hand, so I did. Started off with the sandpaper, and then I started moving down the line and on the sticks, and this is what I came up with. Hey, it looks dang good. That is a huge, huge improvement and another win. I mean, seriously, I'm just happy with how much better this case looks than when I first got it. I even got that circular graining on. I pushed it down and then turned it side to side. Another thing I learned from Mike. And I got to say the improvement is huge. Now, another thing, though, that was bugging me is I'm rewinding a bit here to show you what the hands look like. They are terrible. The loom is completely blacked out or deteriorated, and they look really bad. And I know that in the past, again, I've decided not to do that. This time, though, we're diving in head first. And again, you get to come along for the ride. So we are going to completely re-loom these hands. So first things first, though, is I don't like it when people re-loom hands with stark white loom on a vintage watch. It just doesn't look right to me. So what I'm going to do is an experiment. First off, I've got my little loom kit here, and I'm going to mix up the loom. Now, I haven't really done this before, so I'm figuring this out as well. And I've got these test hands. These are just cheap hands I got off of eBay. And I'm going to test out how to do the loom on them before I work on the real ones. And as you can see, it's not going very well. When I watched Mark over at the Watch Repair channel do it, the loom just seemed to go on better. And this looks like it's too thick. I think that I've got the mixture wrong because the loom doesn't really want to kind of pull itself over the gap. It's clumpy and I don't know. It just doesn't seem right. So what I'm going to do here is add a little bit more of the binding liquid and then try it on the other hand. And as you can see right away, that's better. That's the expectation I have. And I got to say, when I was looming up the first hand, I thought this is really difficult. And after getting the mixture right, it's not that bad. This is, it's still watchmaking stuff, under magnification, tiny little stuff, but it's not that bad. It kind of goes the way you want it to once you get the consistency right. So my plan here is to loom up these hands and then try to figure out my own way to age them. So once I've got these done, I was brainstorming about how the heck am I going to do this. Now I looked online and people that do watch hands professionally are very sketchy about what they use to re-loom. By the way, this is how they came out when they dried. Gorgeous. But again, stark white, way too much. So here's the idea that I had heard rumors of and decided to try for myself. That is black coffee and that is black tea. And what I'm going to do is attempt to use these liquids to age these hands in some way. Now, I don't know if this is going to work. I don't know if it's just going to ruin the loom. I don't know if it's going to tint it properly, if it's going to be too much, too little, but it's an experiment and we're going to learn for ourselves rather than trying to rely on somebody else because I couldn't find the information online. I don't know how much coffee to put on, but my plan here is to put the black coffee on this minute hand, and then I'll try the tea on the hour hand. Well, that looks fine. You can see the coloration there. I don't know how it'll be when it dries, though. And again, I also don't know if it'll damage the loom. The loom is on a binder. It's quite strong, but coffee's kind of acidic. I don't know if it'll just eat through it, and when I come back the next day, it'll be gone. Who knows? Right away, you can see that the black tea is also not nearly as dark, right? So I expect that this hand will not be as aged, if you will. I have to admit, I did not anticipate needing black tea and black coffee for watchmaking, but here we are. So here's how they came out. You know what? That's actually pretty good. I mean, it's a little uneven, but it definitely looks more aged. And as you can see, the tea was much less so, but it does take the edge off of that really bright white. And I assume I could also just put another layer on if I really want it. Well, here we go. It is time to dive in and scrape off this loom. And I'm not going to lie, this felt very strange doing this. I felt like I was ruining something, but I get it. There are different ways to look at vintage wristwatch restoration. And sometimes, you really do want to get the thing back to its true former glory. And I'll be honest, the lume on these hands just looked awful. It was terrible, and maybe it wouldn't even have lasted. Although, given how hard it is to actually get the lume out of here, I feel like maybe it would have been just fine. So I'm using my tweezers to, as carefully as I can, scrape out the old lume from the old hands so that I can relume them with new lume, and then do my coffee trick. And I think I'm going to use the coffee because I looked at the dial and the lume is fairly well aged, especially on the hour markers. There's a few big hour markers on the watch that are a little bit less. So I'm kind of trying to go in the middle, but the lume is pretty well gone on the other hour markers, and I don't want this to stand out that much. So here's the hour hand. Same deal. Just using my tweezers to scrape off the old lume, using a blower every once in a while to clean it up and see where we're at, and as well as some Rodico to kind of pick up any of the little dots. And one more hand to go. That's the second hand. All right, so now the lume's gone, and we can relume these hands to continue our experiment. So this is, again, now I'm starting to get a hang for the consistency on the lume, so I don't have that same issue as I did before with it clumping up, because I've kind of made sure that it's correct. And I'm reluming hands like a pro now. It's actually not hard. And this is how they came out. As you can see, quite good, but also very, very bright white. But I'm really happy. I mean, I've been able to, I'm reluming hands now. This is cool. And now it's time to put the coffee on and see what kind of results we get. So here we go. Put a bunch of coffee on this one. This does feel strange, by the way, putting coffee on a thing, but it's the best thing that I figured out, and it worked pretty well on our test hands. There we go. Get a good amount on there. And then the second hand is left. I can't seem to quite get enough to actually go on here. Well, that's close, but I need a little more. And somehow I have this comically big bubble of coffee on there. And, perfect. We did it. Now, I do have to clean up the actual hands after it's done drying, because the coffee will dry on the hand part. But here's the final product. Kind of looks like I gave a snake a mohawk. But at any rate, the hands look good. I'm actually pretty happy with this. And I think they match pretty well to the dial. You'll have to wait and see till the end. Now we got to turn our attention to the bezel. And this is a source of great stress because I don't really know what it's made out of. It's some type of acrylic or bakelite or something like that. But it is damaged really badly. And I just need to take a shot at fixing this thing. So what I'm going to do is use the sticks that I got, and I'm going to work my way up through all of them. So I'm going to go from, I think I started at 600 grit here. And I'm going to go all the way up to 7,000 grit. And then I'm even going to finish off the end part with a little bit of polywatch. That's just the watch crystal cleaner or polish. And this is how it came out when I was done. How nice is that? It still has all of its vintage charm. Like, it doesn't look like I, redid it in a horrible way, but it's nice and shiny and clear again. So I'm super happy with that. And it's like, this restoring thing's kind of fun. Like, you're really bringing stuff back. So let's get this watch back together. Here comes the mainspring, which we're going to put just a thin layer of grease on. And then we need, since this is an automatic watch, we're going to use what they call braking grease. This goes around the outside of the barrel wall because remember, automatic watch, once it gets fully wound up, the mainspring will actually drag along the inside of that barrel because otherwise it would get overwound and it would break. So a little bit of grease on there helps it slow it down, but also helps the barrel wall from getting damaged when the watch does get fully wound for long periods of time. Oh, wait. Second best sound in watchmaking? Best feeling in watchmaking? Let's hear it. Oh God, I love that. So we're going to put the mainspring back in. I love that sound. I think the best feeling in watchmaking is when the balance starts up again. But this is right up there for sure. So get a little oil on there and then get the barrel back together. Next, we need to put the automatic works back together. Now, this is a bit of a challenge for me because I never got a chance to actually see what it looked like with it all assembled because I took it apart kind of weird. I knew all the parts that went in it and I figured it out. That's what I'll say here. And as you can see, I've got it back together and ready to go into the watch. And so this means we can get kicking here on getting the train of wheels back together and getting this movement back together. Now, I still haven't figured out exactly why it wasn't running. I figured it had something to do with the cannon pinion, but we'll have to wait and see how that goes when we get there. For now, I think I'm content to just put this watch back together and just see what it does. There are times when just simply cleaning it and reassembling it can resolve issues, at least in my experience. So here's the train of wheels getting put back together. And then we can put the bridge back on. This is always a tricky part because you have to line up all of the pivots. The pivots are like the axles on the wheels, and they go into the top and bottom part of the plates, kind of like a sandwich. The plates are the bread and the wheels are the meat. But the difference is you can't just slap in these wheels and start eating. You got to be very careful. And I finally got this bridge in place. I'm using that plastic stick just to make sure that the pivots don't come out when I go to screw it back down. That's just a safety measure. And I'm going to oil the barrel here. All of the oils that I use on these watches are synthetic, kind of modern oils, rather than animal or plant-based. All right, now we need to get this click spring back in. It's always a little fiddly thing. And there we go. Kind of excited to see how this watch turns out, given all the extra work to refurbish the case, the hands, the bracelet, etc. Now we can put the ratchet wheel back on now that we've got the click as well as the crown wheel. And again, always remember that oftentimes the crown wheel has a reverse threaded screw, so I'm going to turn this to the left to screw it in. This one on the ratchet wheel is just a normal. Okay, so now we can flip this thing over and get to cracking. Now here's the cannon pinion, and it just, I don't know, it just goes on quite easily here. And it kind of makes me nervous because generally speaking, those are supposed to be friction fit. Now here I'm putting this little intermediate wheel thing on, but it's kind of weird. And then I can put the cannon pinion back on. But again, it just sort of slides on, and that makes me think that that's likely the issue. Now I can put this hour wheel on as well as the calendar driving wheel. Now we can turn our attention over to the to the keyless works. That's the clutch wheel there, and I'm putting some grease on the ratchet part where it ratchets up against the sliding clutch, and that's a fairly high friction part, so I'm using the grease there, which is the most robust lubricant that we use in these watches, or at least that I do. And there's the sliding clutch there. Little bit of oil there on the intermediate wheel post, and a little bit of grease on most parts of the watch stem here, because these are, again, fairly high friction parts, at least for a watch. And now I can put the yoke in place. That actually interacts with the sliding clutch, and then the yoke spring is what keeps tension on it. Again, this whole section of the watch is the part that's responsible for setting the time and winding it if you want to wind it manually, although this is an automatic, so you don't have to do that. Now the setting lever spring can go on, with which also acts as kind of a cover plate for some of the other parts, and I can just set the setting lever spring here. A little bit of grease. Again, this is a high friction part. And I put a little too much on, so I'm just going to use some Rodico to clean it up. And as you can see, I can now turn it forward and also wind it. So it looks like things are actually working again. And hey, if that problem magically fixed itself, I'd be pretty thrilled with that. Okay, this is the calendar jumper and the jumper spring. And there's a calendar wheel. Or disc, I should say. Of course, this is what indicates the date. And again, I appreciate the fact that they made this color match to the dial. Thought that was a cool touch. And then there's this cover plate that kind of covers up the whole thing. And I'm just going to make sure, whoop, there we go, that the calendar turns over. And it does. So now I'm going to get out the one dip, which is like a cleaner solvent. And I can use this just to make sure that the balance and the pallet forks are perfectly clean before we put them back in the watches. These are the most delicate parts of a watch. We just use a little hand blower here to dry them off. It dries them off very quickly because it's a solvent. And now I can place the pallet fork, again, very carefully. And once I get that put in, I can just double check that the pallet fork's working, and then I can move on to putting in the balance. So this, of course, is a huge moment in any time that you're working on a watch. Now, this one was working before, so I darn well expect it to work again, but still. Come on. Okay, all right. We have life. It lives. Again, it's just the best feeling. It's, you know, I partly made this channel to share this hobby with other people who might be interested in it, and I'll tell you, that's the best part right there. Love that feeling when the watch kicks back up to life. And it looks like it's running pretty healthy too. All right, and next, of course, we need to get the cap jewels out of there, separated, cleaned thoroughly, re-lubricated, and then replaced. And that, of course, means that we get to play this fun little game with the ink block setting or the shock setting, whichever one this is on the top. But I have to say, I'm really kind of getting the hang of this. And it's kind of fun. I decided to oil these off camera, as it is a bit difficult to capture that part of it, and it's not particularly exciting. And as you can see, I kind of missed with this one, but there we go. And only thing left to do is just close it back up. Almost. Almost. There we go. And now we can do the bottom version of that. Of course, if you haven't seen these before, these jewels are jewel settings, which are comprised of a cap jewel, which is the red part that you see. And then below that, there's another jewel with a hole in it that the pivot actually goes into. You can actually see it sticking up right there into that section. And they kind of sandwich together. And in between them, you put a very small amount of oil. And the oil is then suspended there between the two. And as it sits, it will hold itself right where that pivot is. And boom, look at that shot. Pretty nice. I'm getting real nice now. I kind of actually dropped it, but it fell right into place. Anyway, and that'll keep it lubricated and running as well as it can. And since this part has really constant friction on it for the entire time that the watch is running, it's really important that that gets done correctly. All right, so job done there. Now let's continue with putting the automatic works back together. So this part goes over this post, and then this little clip kind of pushes up against it so that it can't come off, and then it's secured by a screw. I figured this out after the fact. Sometimes you have to reverse engineer how these things work, but I can't really do that until I have the thing apart, and that's what it took for me this time. So now I can put the automatic works back on top here where it will engage with the winding works. It's really cool. All right, now I got it back on. I'm just giving it a quick test, and you can see the wheel spinning there, so all is well there. Now, as far as this dial goes, I'm cleaning it up with just a little sponged tip thing here, but I'm using a really special solution on it that's top secret. I will share it with you, of course. It's just water. I didn't want to put on anything else. Like, I don't know if I'm supposed to use detergents or something like that, but I figured just a quick brush up of this dial could help clean up a little bit of the stains and dirt, and it did. It had a couple of stains on there that are gone now. So I'm happy with that. Again, this dial's in good shape. It doesn't need some huge restoration, and that, frankly, would be out of my range anyway. I wouldn't even attempt to fully restore a dial. I think I would just make it worse. So now I can screw down the dial and get it in place. Now this thing needs a new crystal, and boy, does this thing need a new crystal. That original crystal was horrendously bad, really destroyed. And so I'm going to use my crystal press. Now this is a little bit different than the way we normally do it, because this one actually has a metal ring inside. So this one is just simply press fit into place. It's just shoved down and press fit. The ones I normally do are tension fit, and this one just gets, there we go, pushed in just a little further for good measure, and that's it. It just gets pushed down into the watch, and it's as simple as that. And this crystal looks way, way better. They have a metal tension ring that holds them in place. This is common on dive watches that need to be waterproof to a depth. Okay, so now we are in the home stretch here. And we can get this bezel back on this beast. And I don't really know exactly how these work, but I guess they're pretty straightforward. I'm just going to get this spring wedged back into the crevice here and then just throw the thing back on. I mean, it just clicks onto the watch. And now I can just press it back onto place onto the case. There we go. Bezel on, crystal on, case refinished. Now I can take the hands out of this really cool little box. It's called a membrane box. It actually has 2 layers of kind of soft plastic in the middle there, and they're suspended, so anything you put in there just stays put, but it's held very gently. So now I'm getting the calendar to midnight. I know because the calendar just turned over, and that means that it's a new day, which happens at midnight. And now I can put the hands on at midnight. I always wondered how watchmakers did this, and I started watching videos on YouTube, and I was like, oh, well, that was clever and surprisingly simple, but that is exactly how we do it. Now for the minute hand. Okay, so now we can give it a quick spin just to make sure that the hands aren't touching each other. And everything looks good. And now we can put the seconds hand on, and that seems to be moving fine, but that also was before. And now we can use the hand blower here just to make sure that there's no dust or debris before we case the watch. And this is getting really exciting. Our first full restoration is nearly complete. And we do need a new gasket. You may be surprised to learn that that other one didn't quite survive the process, as it ended up being in crumbled dust on my bench. So we'll just give it a quick charge of silicone grease there, and then get that in place. And that'll help it stay more waterproof. There's a movement ring that goes in place here as well. It's just plastic, but it seems to have held up fine, and it's doing its job, so no big deal. And yes, I did polish the back of the watch as well, so Lou, I hope I did you proud. Brought your watch back to life. Hopefully it looks like it did when you first bought it. And look at the hands particularly, right? So much better than just stark white. But the case, the bezel, the crystal, it looks good. I'm like really, really happy with how this came out. This definitely exceeded my expectations. Now I do need to get a few new spring bars here, because as we saw before, the old ones, well, they didn't work. And I'm going to put our restored bracelet on this as well. Again, this is an aftermarket bracelet of some sort, I'm sure, as it's kind of made to fit like a range of lugs. You know, this is an 18 to 20 or something like that, I would guess. But they actually look pretty decent for what they are. And they're definitely common to that time period as well. And there you go. How great does this watch look? Now, I am really, really pleased with how this thing came out. I'm not going to lie, but something did happen. The hour and minute hands, they still did not move. So I took this watch apart again. I'm not going to show you that because it's the same thing I did before. And I found the issue. I had to reverse engineer it, but I found it. And it is this right here on the third wheel. That is what acts as the cannon pinion, and that is supposed to have tension on it, and it didn't. I ended up ordering another one, and this is how the watch did after I installed it and regulated it. Look at that. High amplitude, minimal beat error, and the rate is actual 0 seconds a day. So this is what the watch looked like before when it first came in the mail. It's a complete disaster. And this is what it looked like after. I did not realize how fun it was going to be to fully restore a watch. And while I felt a little weird doing it, I don't feel weird now that I hold it in my hands. And when I sell this watch on and somebody gets to enjoy it and wear it, I'm going to feel really proud about that. And again, I took the extra time to do the bracelet again, and I'm really glad I did, because now I'm happy with it. And I took my time on the watch as well to make sure that it was right. And as you can see, it came out pretty darn good, all things considered. So that's it. That is the Tradition Skin Diver full restoration. I want to thank you for coming along with me for this journey, as it was quite a journey, and I learned so much from doing this. I'm sure I will be restoring other watches on the channel to their former glory the best that I can. And I wanted to mention one other thing as well, which is that I started a Patreon for this channel, and that's a place where you can go to support your favorite content creators and to keep the type of content that you like coming. As you might imagine, these videos take a lot of effort and resources to put together, and if you'd like to give something back, You can go to patreon.com/wristwatchrevival and you'll even get some cool perks for supporting the channel. Of course, if you want to keep up on what I'm doing when I'm not uploading a video, you can follow me on Instagram at wristwatch_revival. I do some project updates and pictures and stuff on there. So that's it. We'll see you next time.